My name is Savannah Rivers, and I thought I knew my father. 23 years of believing he was the devoted grandfather who spoiled my son, Mason, rotten. 23 years of watching him bounce my millionaire boy on his knee, telling bedtime stories, being the perfect family patriarch. Until last Christmas Eve, when I walked into his study and saw him pour something from a tiny vial into Mason's wine glass. My blood froze as he handed it to my son with that familiar, loving smile. Everything I believed about family loyalty shattered in that moment. Before we dive into this twisted tale of family betrayal and the shocking truth that destroyed everything, tell me where you are watching from tonight. If stories about family deception and ultimate justice get your heart racing, like mine does, smash that like button and subscribe, because you will not believe what my own father was planning for my son. Trust me, this family drama will leave you questioning everything you think you know about blood relatives. The evening started like any other holiday celebration at my father's sprawling Connecticut estate. Dad had always been larger than life. Harold Rivers, the self-made construction mogul who built our family's fortune from nothing. At 72, he still commanded respect in every room he entered, his silver hair perfectly styled, his blue eyes sharp as ever. Mason, my 25-year-old son, had just sold his tech startup for $47 million, and Dad could not have been prouder. "My grandson, the entrepreneur," Dad kept saying throughout dinner, raising his glass repeatedly, just like his old grandfather building empires. I should have noticed the edge in his voice, the way his eyes lingered on Mason a little too long, but I was caught up in the family warmth. Mason had always been Dad's golden boy, the heir apparent to the Rivers legacy. When Mason announced his engagement to Sarah, a brilliant Harvard MBA, Dad seemed genuinely thrilled. "Sarah, welcome to the family," Dad had said, embracing her. "You picked yourself a winner. Mason's going to change the world. Just wait and see." The first sign something was wrong came during dessert. Dad kept checking his vintage pocket watch, the one he claimed belonged to his father. Mason noticed too. "Grandpa, you seem nervous about something. Everything okay?" Dad's laugh was forced. "Just excited about your future son. Speaking of which, I have something special planned. Why don't you come to my study after dinner? We need to discuss your inheritance plans now that you're officially a millionaire." That should have been my second warning. Dad never discussed money during family gatherings. He always said business and family should remain separate. But Mason was beaming, clearly touched by his grandfather's attention. After dinner, I went to the kitchen to help Mom with dishes while Mason and Dad headed to the study. 20 minutes later, I realized I had left my phone in Dad's study. The house was old with thick walls, but as I approached the heavy oak door, I could hear voices inside. "You know, Mason's success comes with responsibilities," Dad was saying. "Sometimes we have to make difficult choices to protect what we've built." "I understand, Grandpa. I want to honor our family legacy." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." I reached for the door handle, but something in Dad's tone made me pause. There was a coldness there I had never heard before, even in his business dealings. Instead of entering, I crept closer to the door, which was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see Dad moving toward the wet bar in the corner of his study. Mason was sitting in the leather chair facing away from me, completely relaxed. Dad poured wine into 2 glasses, a rich red from his collection. But then I watched in horror as he pulled a small glass vial from his jacket pocket. My heart stopped. The vial contained a clear liquid, and without hesitation, Dad emptied its contents into one of the wine glasses. He swirled it gently, the liquid disappearing completely into the deep red wine. Then he walked back toward Mason, carrying both glasses. "Here's to your future grandson," Dad said, his voice warm and loving again. "This is a special bottle I've been saving for years. 1997 Bordeaux from the year you were born." I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. Every instinct told me to burst through that door, but I was frozen by disbelief. This was my father, the man who had raised me, who had helped me through my divorce, who had been Mason's hero since childhood. Mason reached for the glass Dad offered him, the one with whatever had been in that vial. "Thanks, Grandpa. This means everything to me." "It means everything to me too," Dad replied, and there was something final in his voice that sent ice through my veins. I watched Mason lift the glass toward his lips, and that's when my maternal instincts finally overcame my shock. I slammed through the door. "Mason, stop! Don't drink that!" Both men turned to me in surprise. Mason's glass was inches from his lips. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, then something that looked almost like relief. "Savannah, what are you doing?" Mason asked, lowering the glass. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I stared at my father, this man I thought I knew completely. "Dad, what did you put in that wine?" The silence in the room was deafening. Dad's hand trembled slightly as he set down his own glass. For a moment the mask slipped, and I saw something in his eyes that terrified me more than anything. Not guilt, but calculation. "I don't know what you're talking about, sweetheart," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "I saw you, Dad. I saw you pour something from a vial into Mason's glass." Mason looked between us, confusion replacing the relaxed happiness from moments before. "Grandpa, what's she talking about?" Dad straightened his shoulders, and suddenly he looked every one of his 72 years. "Sit down, both of you. I suppose it's time you knew the truth about our family's real legacy." The silence in Dad's study was suffocating. Mason still held the poisoned wine glass, staring at it like he could not comprehend what it represented. I moved quickly to take it from his hands, my own shaking, as I set it on Dad's massive mahogany desk. "The truth?" I managed to whisper. "What truth, Dad?" Harold Rivers, the man I had called my hero for 38 years, sank into his chair behind the desk. For the first time in my life, he looked defeated. Not tired, not stressed from business, but utterly defeated. "The Rivers fortune," he began slowly, "was not built on construction contracts and smart investments. That was just the front, the legitimate face we showed the world." Mason and I exchanged glances. My son's face had gone pale, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was always the smart one, the analytical one who could piece together complex puzzles. "What are you saying?" Mason asked, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Dad opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. "I'm saying that for 40 years I've been running one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations on the East Coast. Construction was perfect. Cash-heavy business, easy to inflate costs, simple to create phantom projects. Every major crime family from Boston to New York has used Rivers Construction to clean their dirty money." The words hit me like physical blows. "That's impossible. I've worked in your office. I've seen the books, the contracts, the building permits." "You saw what I wanted you to see, sweetheart. The real books are in a safety deposit box that only I have access to. Over the years, we've cleaned nearly $800 million in drug money, gambling profits, and worse." Mason stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "The federal investigations," he said quietly. "There have been 3 in the last decade. I always wondered how you made them disappear." "Expensive lawyers and well-placed bribes," Dad admitted. "But it's getting harder. The FBI is closing in, and I've received word that they're planning to move within the next 6 months. Grand jury indictments are coming." I felt like I was drowning. "So you decided to, kill your own grandson to protect yourself?" Dad's eyes flashed with something between anger and desperation. "Not to protect myself, Savannah. To protect you. And him. When the feds come, they'll seize everything, every asset, every account, every piece of property connected to the Rivers name, Mason's $47 million included." "What do you mean, included?" Mason turned from the window, his business mind clearly working through the implications. "I helped finance your startup grandson, $3 million in seed money that I funneled through offshore accounts. Money that came from very bad people who expect it back with interest. When the authorities trace those funds, your entire company sale becomes fruit of the poisonous tree. You'll lose everything and likely face federal charges yourself." The room spun around me. My son, my brilliant, innocent son, had unknowingly built his success on blood money. "You bastard," I whispered. "You ruined him before he even knew what was happening." "I tried to protect him." Dad's voice rose for the first time. "Do you think I wanted this legacy for my family? I got in too deep 30 years ago, and every year it got worse. But I made sure you and Mason stayed clean, stayed innocent." By planning to murder him. Dad's shoulders sagged again. The liquid in that vial was not poison Savannah. It was a concentrated sedative, enough to put him into a coma that would last several weeks, maybe months. I have a doctor on payroll who would have declared it a brain aneurysm. By the time Mason woke up, if he woke up, the federal investigation would be over, the assets seized, and the trail cold. Mason's voice was hollow. You were going to put me in a coma to save me from prison. I was going to save your life. Dad slammed his fist on the desk. Do you have any idea what happens to rich kids in federal prison? Especially ones connected to organized crime money. You would not have survived 6 months. I stared at this stranger wearing my father's face. There had to be another way. There was no other way. Dad's mask was completely gone now, revealing the desperate cornered animal underneath. I spent 2 years trying to find alternatives. I consulted with the best criminal lawyers money could buy. I even reached out to some of my business associates to see if arrangements could be made. But the feds have been building this case for 5 years, Savannah. They have paper trails, recorded conversations, photographic evidence. When they move, it will be swift and complete. Mason returned to his chair, but he looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. What about Mom? Does she know? Your grandmother knows nothing. I've kept her completely insulated from the business side of our lives. She believes every penny came from legitimate construction work. Dad's voice softened when he mentioned Mom. She's going to lose everything too. The house, her art collection, her charity work, all of it will be gone when the seizure orders come through. So your plan was to drug me, fake a medical emergency, and let the rest of the family face the consequences. Mason's analytical mind was working through the horror of it all. My plan was to save the only person in this family who still had a chance at a clean life, Dad replied. With you in a medically induced coma, they could not question you about the business. Your assets would be tied up in medical conservatorship, making them harder to seize immediately. I hoped it would buy enough time for the lawyers to find loopholes. And if I died instead of just falling into a coma? Dad's silence was answer enough. I felt rage building in my chest, replacing the shock. This man had been willing to kill my son to cover his own crimes. But underneath the rage, my mind was starting to work. There had to be a way to turn this around, to use Dad's own crimes against him. Dad, I said carefully, you mentioned recorded conversations and photographic evidence. Where exactly did the feds get this information? He looked at me suspiciously. Why? Because if you've been so careful for 40 years, someone had to have betrayed you. Someone close enough to get that kind of evidence. Dad's face went ashen. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe you're not the only one in this family who's been keeping secrets. The look on Dad's face told me I had hit something important. His eyes darted between Mason and me, and I could see the paranoia that had probably been eating at him for months, finally breaking through his controlled exterior. What do you know? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I was bluffing, fishing for information, but his reaction confirmed my suspicion. I know that someone with access to your private files has been feeding information to the FBI. Someone who knows about the offshore accounts, the Phantom construction projects, the real client list. Mason caught on quickly. Grandpa, who else has access to your study? Who else knows about the safety deposit box? Dad's hands were trembling now. No one. Only me. That's not true, I pressed. Someone helped you build this operation. 40 years of money laundering doesn't happen in a vacuum. You had partners, accountants, lawyers who facilitated the transactions. My accountant died 3 years ago, Dad said quickly. Heart attack. My lawyer in Miami retired and moved to Costa Rica. The operation has been just me for the last 5 years. What about Uncle Robert? Mason asked suddenly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Uncle Robert was Dad's younger brother, his supposed partner in the construction business. I had always assumed Robert was the creative half while Dad handled the business side. Robert doesn't know anything about the financial side, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Dad, I said softly, Robert's been handling the books for the last 2 years. You told me you were training him to take over the business when you retired. He only sees the legitimate construction accounts. Then how did the FBI get detailed information about offshore transactions from 1998? I was still bluffing, but Dad's face went white. How do you know about 1998? I had struck gold. Because that's when Mason was born, and you said yourself you'd been planning this for years. You must have made mistakes back then, when you were getting careless with new fatherhood distracting you. Mason leaned forward. Grandpa, what happened in 1998? Dad's resolve finally crumbled. There was a payment. $7 million from the Torino family for a casino construction project that never existed. The money went through 4 different shell companies before ending up in my personal account. It was sloppy traceable if someone knew where to look. And Uncle Robert helped you set up those shell companies, I guessed. He was supposed to destroy the paperwork afterward. He swore he had. The pieces were falling into place. But he kept copies, insurance in case you ever tried to cut him out of the business. Dad nodded slowly. Robert's been asking for a larger cut lately. He wants 50% of everything, says he's earned it after 20 years of keeping quiet. I told him the operation was winding down, that we needed to go legitimate. So he decided to cash in with the FBI instead, Mason concluded. Turn you in, collect the reward money and probably immunity in exchange for cooperation. The bastard's been wearing a wire, Dad whispered. For months, he's been recording our conversations. I found the listening device in my office last week, but I thought it was the feds who had planted it. It was the feds, I said, but Robert put it there for them. The betrayal was written all over Dad's face. His own brother, his business partner for decades, had been systematically gathering evidence against him. He's been asking me to reminisce about the old days, getting me to talk about specific deals, specific clients. I thought he was being nostalgic. He was building a case against you, Mason said grimly. How long do you think he's been cooperating? The FBI investigation started 18 months ago, Dad replied. That's when Robert first suggested we should start talking about succession planning, documenting our business practices for the next generation. I felt sick. Dad, if Robert's been gathering evidence for 18 months, they probably have enough to convict you 10 times over. Which is why I had to act tonight, Dad said desperately. The indictments are coming down next week. I received confirmation from my source in the federal prosecutor's office this afternoon. Wait, Mason said sharply. You have a source in the prosecutor's office, but you didn't know your own brother was the informant. Dad's face crumpled. My source is Robert's girlfriend Angela. She's a paralegal in the prosecutor's office. I've been paying her for information for 6 months. The room fell silent as we all processed this. Dad, I said slowly, if Angela is Robert's girlfriend and she's been feeding you information about the federal investigation, what do you think the chances are that she's been coordinating with Robert the entire time? Oh, God, Dad whispered. It's been a setup. The whole thing's been a setup. They've been playing you from both sides, Mason confirmed. Robert feeds the FBI evidence while Angela feeds you false information about timing and scope. They probably know about tonight's plan, too. As if summoned by our conversation, the sound of car doors slamming echoed from the circular driveway outside. Dad rushed to the window and his face went gray. Federal agents, he said quietly. 4 cars. They're surrounding the house. Mason and I joined him at the window. Men and women in FBI windbreakers were taking positions around the estate, their tactical movements precise and practiced. They knew, Dad said numbly. They knew exactly when to come. Because Robert told them, I said. He probably told them about your plan to drug Mason, about the safety deposit box, everything. A loud knock echoed through the house, followed by an authoritative voice. Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant. Dad turned to us, and for a moment he looked like the grandfather I remembered from my childhood, scared, vulnerable human. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry for all of it. I never wanted this life for our family. I know, I said, surprising myself. Despite everything he had tried to do to Mason, despite the decades of lies, he was still my father. Savannah, there's something else you need to know, Dad said urgently as footsteps echoed through the house. The safety deposit box. It's not just financial records. There are photographs, recorded conversations, evidence of crimes that go back decades. Murders, extortion, witness intimidation. If the FBI gets that box, dozens of people are going to prison, and some of them are going to assume I cooperated with the authorities. What are you saying? I'm saying that even in federal prison, I'm a dead man, and they'll come after you and Mason too, just to make sure the family line ends. The footsteps were getting closer. Mom's voice echoed from somewhere in the house, confused and frightened. Dad, where's the box? First National Bank downtown branch, box number 473. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my desk. Why are you telling me this? Dad grabbed my hands. Because you're going to need leverage. The FBI wants that box more than they want me. If you can get to it first, you might be able to negotiate protection for the family. The study door burst open. 6 federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn. Harold Rivers, you're under arrest, the lead agent announced. You have the right to remain silent. As they cuffed my father, he looked back at us one last time. The wine glass, he mouthed silently. Evidence. Mason and I watched as they led Dad away, his silver hair catching the hallway light. Through the window, we could see them putting him into the back of a federal sedan. Savannah, Mason's voice was shaky. What do we do now? I looked at the wine glass sitting on Dad's desk, the one that contained whatever drug he had intended for my son. Then I looked at the bottom desk drawer where a safety deposit box key was supposedly hidden. Now, I said grimly, we beat Uncle Robert at his own game. The federal agents had cordoned off Dad's study as a crime scene, but they allowed Mason and me to wait in the living room while they processed the house. Mom sat beside me on the antique sofa, her face streaked with tears, clutching a tissue box like a lifeline. 40 years, she kept whispering. 40 years, I lived with a stranger. Through the tall windows, we could see news vans already arriving. The Rivers family scandal was about to become public entertainment. But my mind was focused on that safety deposit box key supposedly taped under Dad's desk drawer. If I could get to the bank before the FBI obtained their own warrant for the box, we might have a chance. Mrs. Rivers, a female FBI agent approached us. Agent Sandra Morrison, according to her badge. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, professional demeanor. We're going to need to interview each of you separately about your knowledge of your husband's activities. We don't know anything, I said quickly. We thought he ran a legitimate construction business. Agent Morrison's expression suggested she had heard that claim many times before. Ma'am, we have evidence suggesting otherwise. Your family has been living on proceeds from criminal activities for decades. The government has grounds to seize all assets connected to Harold Rivers, including this house, vehicles, and bank accounts. Mason stood up. Agent Morrison, my mother and grandmother had no involvement in my grandfather's crimes. They shouldn't be punished for his choices. That will be determined during the investigation, she replied. Right now, I need you all to understand that anything you say can and will be used in court proceedings. As Agent Morrison spoke, I noticed Uncle Robert's car pulling into the driveway. My stomach clenched as I watched him emerge from his BMW, followed by a woman I recognized as Angela, his paralegal girlfriend from the prosecutor's office. They walked toward the house with the confidence of people who knew they were on the winning side. Savannah, Robert called out as he entered the living room, his arms spread wide in a gesture of fake concern. I came as soon as I heard. This is such a shock. I stared at my uncle, this man who had been part of our family gatherings for decades, who had bounced Mason on his knee, who had comforted us during difficult times. Now I could see the calculation behind his concerned expression, the satisfaction he was trying to hide. Uncle Robert, Mason said carefully, I'm surprised you're here. Shouldn't you be worried about the investigation affecting the construction business? Well, I've been completely transparent with the authorities, Robert replied smoothly. I've turned over all the legitimate business records, of course. I had no idea Harold was using our company for illegal activities. Angela stepped forward, extending her hand to Agent Morrison. Agent Morrison, I'm Angela Foster from the prosecutor's office. I've been assisting with document preparation for this case. The pieces clicked together in my mind. Angela was not just feeding information to both sides. She was orchestrating the entire takedown. This was her case, her career-making moment, and she had used Robert to build it. "Ms. Foster," Agent Morrison said, "I wasn't expecting you here tonight." "I wanted to ensure proper protocol was followed," Angela replied. "This case represents 18 months of careful investigation." Mason caught my eye and nodded slightly toward the hallway. We both understood what needed to happen next. "Agent Morrison," I said, standing up. "Could I get some water from the kitchen? This has been overwhelming." "Of course. Agent Parker will accompany you." As we moved toward the kitchen, Mason created a distraction. "Uncle Robert, I'm confused about something. If you and Grandpa were business partners, how did you not know about the money laundering?" Robert's response was practiced. "Your grandfather handled all the financial aspects. I focused on actual construction management permits, workforce coordination. We had very separate roles." "But you signed documents," Mason pressed. "Corporate filings, tax returns, partnership agreements." "I trusted Harold completely," Robert said, but there was an edge in his voice now. Sometimes trust can be misplaced. In the kitchen, I whispered to Agent Parker, "Is it possible for me to get some personal items from my father's study family photos, things with sentimental value?" "The study is still being processed," she replied, "but I can escort you to retrieve specific items if you can identify them clearly." "There's a photo of my mother and me on his desk." I lied smoothly. "It's all I have left of our last family vacation together." Agent Parker considered this. 5 minutes. Touch nothing except the photo." My heart pounded as we returned to Dad's study. Crime scene photographers were documenting everything, but they had finished with the desk area. I moved toward the large mahogany desk, pretending to search for the non-existent photo. "I don't see it," I said, opening the top drawer. "Maybe it fell inside." As Agent Parker watched, I carefully slid open the bottom drawer. My fingers found the edge of tape under the drawer's bottom panel. The key was there just as Dad had promised. I palmed it smoothly while pretending to search through papers. "It's not here," I said with disappointment. "He must have moved it." "I'm sorry," Agent Parker replied. "We'll have to leave now." Back in the living room, Robert was still performing his innocent act. "The important thing is that the truth has finally come out. Harold can get the help he needs, and the rest of us can move forward with clean consciences." Clean consciences. I repeated the safety deposit box key burning in my palm. "That's interesting phrasing, Uncle Robert." "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's interesting how quickly you've distanced yourself from a business you helped build for 20 years. Robert's mask slipped slightly. "Savannah, I understand you're upset, but facts are facts. I've been completely cooperative with the investigation." "More than cooperative," Mason added quietly. "Almost like you were leading it." The silence that followed was electric. Angela's professional composure wavered for just a moment, and Robert's fake concern transformed into something harder. "Are you suggesting something?" Robert asked. Agent Morrison had been watching this exchange with growing interest. "Actually, that's a very good question. Mr. Rivers, when exactly did you first contact our office about your brother's activities?" Robert's face flushed. When I discovered irregularities in the accounts, I felt I had a civic duty to report them." "And when was that exactly?" Morrison pressed. "Approximately 18 months ago." "Interesting," Morrison said, pulling out her phone. "Because according to our records, the first contact about Harold Rivers came from an anonymous tip 20 months ago." Angela stepped forward quickly. "Agent Morrison, perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." "No," Morrison said firmly. "I think we should continue it right here. Mr. Rivers, did you place an anonymous tip before making your official cooperation agreement?" Robert's lawyer instincts kicked in. "I need to speak with my attorney before answering any more questions." "Uncle Robert," I said sweetly, "that sounds like something someone with a guilty conscience might say." As the federal agents began looking at Robert and Angela with new suspicion, I realized that Dad's criminal empire was not the only thing collapsing tonight. The careful partnership between my uncle and his prosecutorial girlfriend was beginning to unravel under scrutiny. The safety deposit box key felt heavy in my hand. Tomorrow morning, I would discover exactly what leverage Dad had been talking about, and Robert was about to learn that betraying family comes with consequences he had never anticipated. The next morning, I arrived at First National Bank 30 minutes before opening time. Mason sat beside me in my car, both of us running on coffee and determination rather than sleep. The previous night had ended with Robert and Angela being escorted to the Federal Building for additional questioning, their confident facade cracking under Agent Morrison's increasingly pointed questions. "Are you sure about this?" Mason asked as we watched the bank employees arriving for work. "No," I admitted. "But Dad was right about needing leverage. If Robert's been playing both sides, there might be evidence in that safety deposit box that proves it." At exactly 9 o'clock, we entered the bank. The key felt like it weighed 50 pounds in my purse. I approached the customer service desk with what I hoped looked like confidence. "Good morning. I need to access my father's safety deposit box. Harold Rivers, box number 473. And the young banker, whose name tag read Jennifer, checked her computer. "I'll need identification and documentation proving your authority to access the box." I handed over my driver's license and a notarized power of attorney document I had found in Dad's home office safe. Thank God he had been thorough with his legal paperwork. "This appears to be in order," Jennifer said after several minutes of verification. "However, I should mention that federal agents were here yesterday with a warrant request for the same box." My blood ran cold. "Did they access it?" "No, ma'am. The warrant was still pending judicial review, but they did place a hold on the box pending the outcome." Mason leaned forward. "What kind of hold?" "A monitoring hold. We're required to notify the FBI if anyone attempts to access the box before their warrant is approved." I felt the walls closing in. "How long do we have before you make that notification?" Jennifer looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm supposed to call immediately." "But you haven't yet," Mason observed. "I was planning to complete the access procedure first, then make the notification call." I saw our window of opportunity. "Jennifer, my father is in federal custody. This might be the last chance I have to retrieve family heirlooms and personal documents before the government seizes everything. Could you please just let me see what's in there?" Jennifer wavered her professional training, battling against human sympathy. "I suppose I could escort you to the box first, then handle the paperwork." 10 minutes later, we stood in the bank's vault area as Jennifer inserted her master key alongside Dad's key. The safety deposit box was larger than I had expected, roughly the size of a small briefcase. As the metal door swung open, I gasped at what I saw inside. Stacks of photographs, dozens of audio cassettes, multiple USB drives, legal documents bound with rubber bands, and most shocking of all, a thick manila envelope labeled Robert Rivers, Insurance. "Holy shit," Mason whispered, forgetting where we were. I grabbed the envelope first. Inside were bank statements showing payments from Robert to offshore accounts dating back 15 years, copies of emails between Robert and various crime family representatives, and most damning of all, photographs of Robert meeting with known organized crime figures at restaurants throughout New England. "Mason," I said quietly, "Dad wasn't the only one running criminal operations. Robert's been running his own side business." The audio cassettes were labeled with dates and locations. I grabbed one from 2 years ago and saw the notation, Robert Rivers, Torino family, protection arrangement. He's been running protection rackets, I realized, using Dad's legitimate construction business as cover, but operating his own extortion ring on the side. "And Angela helped him document everything," Mason added, finding a USB drive labeled Federal Evidence Prep, A. Foster. Jennifer cleared her throat. "Ma'am, I really need to make that phone call now." "Of course," I said rapidly, stuffing documents into my purse. "Just give me 1 more minute." At the bottom of the box, I found a letter in Dad's handwriting addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. "Savannah, if you're reading this, then Robert's betrayal is complete. The evidence in this box proves he's been operating independently for years, using our family name to commit crimes I never authorized. More importantly, it proves Angela Foster has been fabricating evidence against me while helping Robert cover his own tracks. The USB drive labeled Audio Files contains recordings of Robert admitting to 3 murders, including the death of our accountant 3 years ago. It wasn't a heart attack. Show this to Agent Morrison. Trust no one else. Love, Dad. I felt like I might faint. Our accountant's death hadn't been natural. Robert had killed him to protect his own secrets. And now he was using Dad as a scapegoat for decades of crimes. "We need to go," I told Mason urgently. "Right now." As we left the bank, Jennifer was already on the phone with the FBI. But I had what I needed. The evidence that would prove Dad was not the mastermind Robert and Angela had painted him to be. My phone rang as we reached the car. Agent Morrison's name appeared on the screen. "Mrs. Rivers, I understand you accessed your father's safety deposit box this morning." "Yes," I said carefully. "I was retrieving personal documents. I need you to come to the federal building immediately. Bring whatever you found." "Agent Morrison, before I do that, I need to ask you something. How well do you know Angela Foster?" There was a pause. "Ms. Foster is a paralegal in the prosecutor's office. She's been assisting with document preparation. Agent Morrison, I think you need to investigate her relationship with my uncle more thoroughly. And you definitely need to look into how our accountant really died 3 years ago." Another pause, longer this time. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that the real criminal in this family has been playing you from the beginning, and I have proof." When we arrived at the federal building an hour later, Agent Morrison was waiting with 2 other investigators and a very nervous-looking Angela Foster. Robert was nowhere to be seen. "Ms. Foster," Morrison said as we entered the conference room, "Mrs. Rivers has made some interesting allegations about your role in this investigation." I placed the manila envelope on the table. "Agent Morrison, everything you think you know about my father's crimes is wrong, and the proof is right here." As Morrison opened the envelope and began reading, Angela's face went white. Through the conference room window, I could see federal agents leading Robert through the hallway in handcuffs. The empire was collapsing, all right, but it wasn't Dad's empire. It was the one Robert had built using our family name, and Angela had helped him frame my father to protect their own criminal enterprise. Justice was finally being served, and it tasted sweeter than I had ever imagined. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom as the judge read Robert's sentence, life in prison, without possibility of parole for 3 counts of murder, racketeering, extortion, and conspiracy to frame Harold Rivers for crimes Robert had committed. Angela received 25 years for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. Dad sat beside his attorney, looking years younger, despite having spent half a year in federal custody. The evidence from the safety deposit box had not only exonerated him of the murders, but had also revealed that Robert had been systematically stealing money from Dad's legitimate construction business to fund his own criminal activities. "Harold Rivers," the judge continued, "while you did participate in money laundering activities, the evidence clearly shows you were coerced by threats against your family's safety. This court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison with credit for time served and eligibility for parole in 18 months. It was not perfect, but it was justice. Dad had made terrible choices, but he had also been manipulated and threatened by his own brother for years. As we left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions about our family's ordeal. Mason walked beside me, his arm protectively around my shoulders. The past 6 months had changed all of us, but especially him. The naive young millionaire who had trusted everyone was gone, replaced by someone who understood that family loyalty had to be earned, not assumed. "No comment," I told the reporters firmly. "Our family has been through enough." But I knew that was not entirely true. We had been through hell, but we had emerged stronger. The Rivers family that existed now bore little resemblance to the one that had gathered for Christmas Eve dinner 6 months ago. Mom had surprised everyone by filing for divorce from Dad while he was in federal custody. 40 years of lies, she had told me simply. I won't spend whatever time I have left wondering what else he's hiding. She was living in a small apartment downtown now, working part-time at an art gallery, happier than I had seen her in decades. The federal asset seizure had taken the house, the cars, most of the bank accounts, but it had also freed her from a life built on secrets and fear. Mason had used his $47 million wisely. After the FBI cleared his startup money of any connection to criminal activity, he had established a foundation to help families affected by white-collar crime. He was also engaged to Sarah, and their wedding was planned for next spring. "Are you really okay with Dad's sentence?" he asked as we walked to our car. I considered the question. "I'm okay with the truth finally being out. Dad made choices that hurt people, and he needs to face consequences for that. But he also spent years protecting us from Robert's violence. The man who tried to drug you wasn't evil Mason. He was desperate and terrified." "I know," Mason said. "I've been visiting him in federal prison. He's different now, more honest, less controlling." I smiled at that. Dad's forced honesty had been one of the few positive outcomes of this nightmare. Without the burden of maintaining decades of lies, he was becoming someone I could actually respect again. "What about you?" Mason asked. "Any plans for the next chapter?" I had been thinking about that question for months. Actually, yes. Agent Morrison offered me a job with the FBI's white-collar crime unit. Apparently, my experience with financial fraud makes me a valuable asset. "You're going to be an FBI agent." "A consultant," I corrected. "Helping families navigate federal investigations, making sure innocent relatives don't get caught up in prosecutorial overreach. Turns out there are a lot of people like us. Families destroyed by one member's criminal choices." Mason grinned. "Mom, the federal crime fighter. I love it." As we drove home, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. "This isn't over. Some debts never get paid. Watch your back. A friend of Robert's." Mason saw my expression. "What is it?" I showed him the message. His jaw tightened. "We need to call Agent Morrison." "Yes." "But first we need to remember something important. We're not victims anymore, Mason. We're survivors, and survivors fight back." The past 6 months had taught me that family was not about blood or genetics or shared last names. Family was about the people who stood by you when everything fell apart, who helped you rebuild when your world collapsed, who loved you despite your flaws and mistakes. Robert had been blood family, but he had tried to destroy us. Agent Morrison, who had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, felt more like family than my uncle ever had. The FBI victim advocates, who had helped us navigate the legal system. The therapist who had helped us process our trauma. Even Jennifer from the bank who had given us those crucial extra minutes. They were our chosen family now. "You know what?" I said, looking at Mason with pride. "Let Robert's friends come. We've been through hell and survived. We know how to fight now, and we know who our real allies are." Mason smiled, and I saw Dad's determination in his eyes, but tempered with wisdom Robert had never possessed. Plus, having an FBI consultant for a mother probably comes with certain advantages. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. Definitely. As we pulled into the driveway of our new house, smaller than the family estate but purchased with clean money and filled with honest conversations, I reflected on the twisted path that had brought us here. Dad had tried to save Mason with a desperate, terrible plan that would have destroyed everything good about our family. But in the end, it was Mason who had helped save Dad and all of us by refusing to accept that blood meant loyalty regardless of actions. The real lesson was not about family betrayal or criminal justice or even revenge. It was about the choice we all face when people we love make terrible decisions. Do we enable them out of misplaced loyalty, or do we love them enough to hold them accountable? We had chosen accountability, and it had nearly destroyed us, but it had also set us free. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was living a double life? How did you handle the betrayal when family loyalty conflicted with doing what was right? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful healing comes from knowing we're not alone in these impossible situations. If this story about fighting for truth despite family pressure resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama about justice, karma, and the courage it takes to choose what's right over what's comfortable. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that families can survive even the worst betrayals when they choose truth over convenient lies. Thank you for taking this journey with me through one of the darkest chapters of my life. Remember, blood may make you related, but loyalty, honesty, and love make you family. Until next time, keep fighting for truth even when it hurts.